Hello everyone! Yes, it's still History's Forgotten People. No, this is not an advert. This is me doing a Q&A session, something which a lot of people have asked for, but as many of you may know, it's not easy to get me on camera. I don't really like being on camera as much as I like just talking about people from the past, but I decided to go for it because it might be a lot of fun. So I'll start with the first question, because you guys just gave me loads of really good questions over email and I think there's comments and things. So I've kind of picked out the ones that were asked the most. I'll answer others in the comments if you've got another one you've thought of after watching this. So the first one, why did I start a YouTube channel? Basically, I was doing my history master's degree and I didn't want to go into teaching. I'm not great with big crowds of people, and I think having to remember a class of 30 children would just, everyone would be girl near the window, boy near the door, just, wouldn't work. So there are actual proper reasons. I'm not that antisocial. Anyway, I actually wanted to do something where I was still teaching people about history because I love talking about it, but mostly I like when someone's understanding of history changes, when there's something perhaps they view negatively or positively, and it just gives a more balanced view. And I love doing that. I love getting people thinking about where we've come from a certain point in history to now. And someone said, hey, why don't you do a YouTube channel just to pass the time? You could, do it as a hobby. And about 3 months in, I realised that actually a lot of you were really, really, really enjoying it. And I thought, right, just go for it. And now it's my job. This is how I started with it. Okay, next question. What do you think of Richard III? Just straight for the jugular. So Richard III, I don't really like. Let's start with that. I think when it was still during his brother's reign, he was a very loyal brother to Edward. You can see that in how he fled with him to Burgundy in 1470. He seems to have backed his brother up with a lot of things. When he was sent to the north, he did it without question. Whether this is actual loyalty and also a little bit of him biding his time, seeing where he was going to gain power is, that's the big question. Because, of course, Richard was quite popular in the north. But as someone from the north today, I can promise you that one of the things at this end of the country we love is when someone from London actually turns up. And if someone did that enough, especially back in the 15th century, they would definitely be popular because you didn't see anybody else. These people would not have seen their king, Edward. They wouldn't have seen his other brother, George, but they saw Richard. Richard came up and was involved. Whether he did a huge amount to change their situation is almost irrelevant. He was the most dominant magnate at the time, and these people were told this is the hierarchy, someone has to be in charge. Well, you're going to lean on the person who is in charge, who turns up the most then. I think marrying Anne Neville was also a power decision. I think that he saw a way to possibly become Earl of Warwick, or at least fight over the inheritance for the earldom with his brother George, who was married to Isabel Neville and sister. The marriage really doesn't seem to have been very happy, which also doesn't go in his favour because Anne was pushed aside. We know so little about her, even though she was a queen, because she didn't really have charge of her own household, her own money in any form. She doesn't really seem to have been allowed to speak up about things. And then, of course, there's the famous incident of the death of his nephews, Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury. And this is just massive, massive, massive black mark against Richard III, I think. Because obviously there's a school of people who I think are in the minority, in my opinion, quite rightfully, who believe he's innocent of all charges. He, looked after them, and one day they'd vanished and he ran up and went, oh my God, where have they gone? It's not likely. He certainly, if he did not actually kill them himself, which is an opinion I'm open to, he knew something. he knew who had done it and he helped cover it up, or he knew who had done it and didn't reveal things because he knew it would look bad on him. Either way, he was involved somehow in the deaths of his nephews, and he made the decision, rather than coming clean about it, to cover it up, and that was for himself. It's difficult to comment on his time as a king because a lot of it was full of conflict, and 2 years is not really enough time for anybody to establish themselves, really. So my overall opinion of Richard III is I don't like him, but I do think he was, if we're looking for some positives, he was a very clever person. I think he understood how to use the positions he was put in to his own advantage. He knew how, going to the north seems like I'm being sent all the way up there, but I can use this. I can gain the trust of people there and use it later on. I can marry Anne Neville now, and it doesn't really seem like much is going to happen there. She's the younger sister, but I might be able to use this later on. So that's how I feel about Richard III at the moment. Okay, next question. Your favourite historical person? Now, if you have followed my channel for a long time, you probably already know the answer to this. It's Empress Matilda. I think she's kind of awesome. I love her. For those who don't know, Empress Matilda was the granddaughter of William the Conqueror. She was the daughter of Henry I. Because her brother, William Adelin, died when he was about 19, she was the only legitimate heir to the throne of England. And you might think, well, yeah, but did her dad back her up? He did, twice. He made all of his courtiers swear fealty to her. This will be your next queen. We're going to have a queen for the first time. And then Henry I dies. Matilda is stuck in France because she's pregnant. And her cousin Stephen of Blois, I can never say that properly, Blois. You guys have no idea how many times I sit there recording this when I have to say Blois, how many times I do it to get it right. Anyway, Stephen of Blois basically came over and took the throne for himself, and Matilda was obviously not very happy about this, but she was stuck, and when she eventually had the resources to come to England, she got into a fight about it, and we kicked off the 19-year civil war known as the Anarchy. Not only did Empress Matilda basically hold her own as a woman, she had help, of course, from her half-brother, Robert of Gloucester. He was basically the finances behind her. He had armies. He was fully behind her claim. She couldn't have done it without him. But nevertheless, she was a female figurehead. She didn't succeed herself. She didn't actually gain the throne from Stephen. What she did do, however, is give birth to 3 sons, the eldest of who would become Henry II, and she passed her claim on to him. He successfully defeated Stephen and made the agreement that once Stephen had died, he would become king. And so she succeeded through proxy and I like that. I like that she went, you know what, I'm not going to be able to get this throne, but my son is. And she became his main advisor. He would seek her approval on a lot of things. And the respect he had for his mother is really evident in that he was also known as Henry Fitz-Empress rather than, using his father's name. So she's my favourite historical person. Oh, this is a good question. Which of my videos is my favourite and why? Probably Madame du Barry, I think, is probably actually my favourite video I've ever done. The reason being, it was, I think, really the first video I did where I took a person who there's a very negative reputation around her because she was a courtesan and she was, she's quite loose morals and all the rest of it. And actually, she wasn't like that. And I love doing that. I love flipping the opinion of someone. She was actually a really kind person. She kind of worked hard through selling her body, through selling herself up to a point, but she worked with what she had. She didn't come from a wealthy background, but she was pretty, Let's not knock it. Who knows what we would have done back at that time. When she had the opportunity to be generous to people, she was generous to a fault. She was kind to everyone. She brought Louis XV a lot of happiness, apparently. She just seems like a really nice person and probably more down to earth than the courtiers who all dismissed her. And a lot of her reputation, I think, comes from the fact that during the French Revolution, she helped people who were, hiding out from the new French regime. She helped them emigrate to England. She helped hide them. This was probably part of the reason that she herself was executed. So that's my favourite video. Do you have a favourite dynasty to research? Oh, this is another hard one. I'm going to go with probably the Plantagenets, which is, everyone will say that. It's not original at all. But I love the Plantagenet dynasty because it goes through so many changes. You come right from the Angevins, which is, my favourite, with Empress Matilda and Geoffrey of Anjou and their children, and all the sort of trying to form itself into a new culture, into a new form of monarchy, shrugging off the Anglo-Saxons that have come before. Then you come down to things like the Barons' Wars and the changes of Parliament, and that's kind of like Henry III and Edward I. And then that leads down to massive changes just in society and constitutionally. There's reforms to feudalism through Edward II, then Edward III. Edward III especially has this really long reign in which what we might know as an English identity really takes hold. Culturally, his reign, and probably also through his queen, Philippa, they encouraged literacy, they encouraged books, they encouraged lots of things which allowed ideas about what being English was to spread. And so that's really fascinating. Then after that, you've got a really militaristic section of the Plantagenets where you've got wars with France, and that leads to massive technological changes with, military hardware and men and things like that. So yeah, that's probably my favourite dynasty. All right, so this was a really good question, I thought, because that's, again, something I'm going to touch on probably in another video. I don't really talk about it a lot. How do I organise my sources? Now, this is something I'm going to touch on in another video at some point because it's quite a good meaty thing to get into. And someone also asked if I could explain the process I use for making AI images. So I'll probably put the two of them together. Basically, I have a combination of books. I'm a bookworm anyway, so I just have a huge hoard of books about all historical subjects. I use lots of online sources like the ODNB, which is the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. That's great if it's someone in Britain. I also use things like JustStore or other websites where there's articles and journals, which is really important to me because then it's more up to date. And then very occasionally, if I'm able, I go to visit actual archives. That allows me to see the documents myself, and you can read the actual words on them as opposed to from a secondhand source, which is someone else reading it and then writing about it. The way I organise them is generally I pick a person that I'm going to research, and about 8 times out of 10, let's say, I do know who that person is anyway, and I have some working knowledge of them. Obviously, some historical figures I already know a lot about, others a little bit less, especially when they are new ones suggested by you guys and I really don't know much about them. So what I like to do is just read as much as possible to start with from as many different sources as possible. And these are always what I would call accredited sources. So non-fiction books about the particular person I'm studying by someone else who is a known historian, someone who studies that area or studies the actual person. Same with articles and things like that. I don't go anywhere near fiction. I have had comments occasionally, oh, you shouldn't have watched this series, you shouldn't have read this book. I haven't. I really don't have time and I get really angry sometimes. Unreasonably so, with lots of period dramas that are on the TV because I just sit there criticising them. They wouldn't have had that dress. Why has she got that kind of light in her house? Why are they wearing glasses? They weren't invented yet, and so on. I don't look at anything fiction for any of my videos. It's all proper research, proper sources. I did used to list them in my descriptions. I'm probably going to start doing that again. Some people complained because they wanted to see other things I put in the description. They felt it was too long. Sometimes I don't put them in, sometimes I do. So that's how I collect them. I kind of read it all. I will make notes. I will, where there is a comparison, where there are two differing opinions, if there's a good argument for them both, I will include them in my video. But what I tend to do is make my own opinion. I tend to look at everything. I tend to, well, not always opinion, that's not right, because if something is fact, it's fact. Where there is an opinion, I like to look at everything, balance it out, and go with what I, myself, think is the case. If ever I want to put something in my video which is someone else's opinion, you might notice that I'll say something like, lots of historians say, or I might name a specific person and say, they have suggested this, because it's not necessarily me saying it. It's not necessarily me putting that opinion forward. I'm just saying this opinion exists. Here, you guys have it. What do you think? Ooh, when did you first get into history? I can pinpoint the exact moment. So as a little girl, I grew up in a place called Teesside. And for those of you outside of Britain, and especially my American viewers, Teesside is a bit like Pittsburgh. It's very industrial. It's, but it does have history. It does have some older buildings, especially from people in the 19th century who were entrepreneurs in the steel industry there. And we went for a visit when I was a little girl with my family to a very small manor house. It's called Ormsby Hall. I remember the very first moment I stepped into the foyer and I looked around and my little mind just went, oh my God, there were Persian rugs, there were massive portraits with gilt frames, there were just ornaments everywhere, gold candlesticks. It was insane because these interiors had only existed for me before in fairy stories. This is how princesses lived. And I was standing in a room with these objects. I remember going through the dining hall and they had the whole silver service laid out. Again, all the portraits of the family scowling down at everyone, all the plates out. The whole thing was so grand, and I think it suddenly struck me at that point that this was the past in a way that I could interact with it. Even if I wasn't allowed to actually touch it in a tactile way, I could look at it, I could view it in its context. I wouldn't have thought of those words when I was 6, but thinking back, it was seeing it in the environment it would have been in and being able to tell the story from it. This is how the family would have sat down to dinner. Why would they sit down to dinner? Why are these portraits on the walls? Why did they have all these rugs? Why is there a secret staircase for the maids? And I think it set off all these questions in my head, and I realised I just loved it. I just loved the why of it all, and how being in that house right there and then, how did that relate to what had happened before? And it just took root, and I think it's just grown and grown since then. Oh, this question I got to ask, but I think many of you probably already know the answer again. Who is my most hated figure in history that I've covered? I mean, it's Henry VIII. You guys know it's Henry VIII. I have a really low opinion of him. If he had been a good king, I think I would probably view him less antagonistically, but I don't think he was a very good king. I think he was a terrible father. He went around murdering people when he fell out with them. I mean, you know all the details. I just generally don't like Henry VIII. I don't think there's anything really redeemable about him. Even when you look into his youth, he is still argumentative and stubborn and getting far, far, far too deep into religion. Ooh, if you could travel to any time period, what would it be? You know, I'm going to pretend you've asked me my 3 favourite periods there. I mean, come on, this is a time machine on a timeshare. You know, come on, I can do 3. A little historical humour there. More on that in a bit. Stay with the video. Okay, I would travel back to ancient Egypt, absolutely. Ancient Egypt during, I don't know, would I go with the reign of Hatshepsut because she's my favourite Egyptian person, or would I be there for the beginning of the pyramids? I'll probably go with around Hatshepsut's reign because a lot isn't known about her either, so I guess that could be a good opportunity to make some notes and actually come back with information. My second period would be... I think the second period I'd come back to might be Elizabethan England because, you know, so much happened in that period of time. Lots of religious change, cultural change. I could go and see William Shakespeare's plays with William Shakespeare probably stood behind a curtain. That's a huge thing for me because my other great love is literature, so surprisingly. Yeah, I think it would be fascinating to be around at that time. But again, as many of you know, the joke I always make is I would not go as anything but a tavern keeper or the tavern keeper's wife because you're not wealthy or aristocratic enough to have your head cut off. You're not poor enough to get into trouble, but you also serve the beer, so everyone likes you. I think it'd be a fascinating period to go back to. I think it would be amazing to see the cult of Elizabeth I actually in action and to see if ordinary people really bought into that the way that they do today with celebrity culture, or if everybody was interested in it. Did some people stand there and like, oh God, Elizabeth again? You know, it would be really, really cool to travel to that point. My third one. Actually, no, I really do know what my third period would be, and it's something I haven't covered actually on my channel yet, but I definitely will at some point, is the English Civil War, because I'm not massively into military history the way a lot of people are. I much prefer the social history. But the English Civil War to me is one of those points where military and social history completely intersect. You have a war that starts with cutting off a monarch's head. You've got religious change. You have changes with women and their role in society because of the Civil War. We've got lots of... we've got the majority of sources from that time. A lot of them are women's diaries, which is huge. And they might have boring things in there, but that tells us a lot about how aristocratic women were trying to continue running their day while the village was being overrun by soldiers. Yeah, so the English Civil War would be probably my third choice. So I've cheated, but I've answered the question. Which 4 figures from history would you invite to a dinner party? I love this one. This is the ubiquitous question about the dinner party. Let's start off with my favourite. Let's start with Empress Matilda. Why not? I like her. She's there because she's my favourite. I think I'm going to go with Leonardo da Vinci as well. I think that would be fascinating. Lots of art, lots of science, and if everyone gets a bit bored at the dinner table, if I've got some napkins and cocktail sticks, I can probably whip up a little quick invention or something. Keep everyone entertained. He's the entertainer, basically. Obviously, he's got a lot more than just making napkin inventions. My third person at the party, let's go for another girl. Let's go with Elizabeth I, another amazing woman. A lot of people on this channel think I don't like her, which is not true. I really, really like Elizabeth I. But I always get asked the question, if you were going on personality alone, who would you like better, Elizabeth I or Mary I? And I'm like, well, Mary I seems a lot calmer and she was known to be a lot kinder. I'm going to go with her. But I really, really, really like Elizabeth I as well. I really respect her. And when I do videos on my channel that perhaps highlight her more negative qualities, it's just to balance her out, because I think in the past we thought of Elizabeth I as this amazing goddess who was so powerful and was so strong and such an amazing monarch that it almost makes her not human. And actually, I like to think of her as, no, she was a normal woman and she had all these flaws and all these negative things, and she still managed to do what she did. She did it really, really well. I think that's way more amazing. So Elizabeth I is there. I reckon she and Empress Matilda are going to have a lot to talk about. And I think she would quite like the culture from Da Vinci as well. Oh, who's my fourth person going to be? We need a bit of conflict, don't we? We need a psychologist or something. Let's throw Sigmund Freud in there. He can be number 4. I think put Freud in there. You've got Elizabeth I with her daddy issues. You've got Empress Matilda wanting to take a man's crown. You've got Leonardo da Vinci. There's probably stuff there. I think everyone's just enjoying themselves, having a lovely cultured chat about oil paintings and, crowns and, oh, how did your military successes go? And Freud turns up late, of course, and the whole dinner party just dissolves into chaos. And I would just sit there and drink wine and enjoy it. I think that would be really, really fun. So that's my 4 guests. Okay, so next question. Why have you not featured my historical person suggestion yet? So, if you've suggested someone to me and I comment and I say, hey, it's been added to the list, trust me, it has been added to the list. I did consider printing my list off, which is on my computer, in order to show you guys, but it's 4 pages long. I have a huge number of people. They are definitely all going to get done over the years. As long as my channel's running, you will one day see them there. I promise. I know in the last poll I did, Isabel Neville has been asked for a few times and she did not quite win. It's Catherine de Medici next week. But after that, Isabel Neville is definitely getting her turn. If you've mentioned someone and I haven't commented, sometimes I just miss comments. Just tell me again. I will eventually get it. Email me even. I have my email on my YouTube channel. Okay, next question. Best historical joke. I have a lot of historical jokes, believe it or not. Again, people following this channel for a long time may have realised I have quite a dark sense of humour. I don't actually even show it that much on the channel, even if you've been around for a long time. So I'm not going to go with some of the darker ones I know. I'm going with a much lighter historical jokes. I have 3. The first one, how do you cut the Roman Empire in half? With a pair of Caesars. I'm going to put canned laughter in there. It's going to be great. Okay. Why did Karl Marx dislike Earl Grey? Because all proper tea is theft. I actually really like that one. That just caught me. I like that. Okay, so my third one, which I quite like, I've had to write a couple of notes to remember because it's quite long. So, Fidel Castro is visiting Moscow and he is taken on a tour by Leonid Brezhnev. They go to a little bar and they have some beers. Wow, says Castro, this beer is really good. Oh yeah, says Brezhnev, that beer is provided by our friends in Czechoslovakia. Then they take a car ride. They need to go and visit somewhere. Fidel Castro is very impressed, says this car is so comfortable, it's a very nice car. Yes, says Brezhnev, these cars are provided by our friends in Czechoslovakia. They get to a museum of fine cut glass. And again, Castro is just blown away by the craftsmanship. He says, this is amazing, this beautiful cut glass. And Brezhnev says, yes, this was also provided by our very good friends in Czechoslovakia. Castro says, wow, the Czechoslovakians, they must be your very good friends. Oh yes, says Brezhnev, they must. I'm probably not selling that at all. So for anyone who's very confused by this joke, it's fair enough, Czechoslovakia its position in the Eastern Bloc was basically coercion as a puppet state, which led to a lot of rebellions, so they didn't want to be there. That's the joke. Okay, so I think that's all the questions. This has been actually really, really fun. I might do this again, if possible. I am going to do another video where I show basically how I go through my sources, how I make my AI images, so there might be a couple more where you see my face. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I know it's a little bit of a break from the normal historical videos, but next week we are straight back to business with Catherine de Medici. And I promise, as much as she is definitely not a forgotten figure, I have got some interesting little tidbits of information about her which you might not have heard before. You know I always do that.